The best performing teams in GAA are generally governed by a few key principles. What are these principles from attack to defence, and how can they be developed through the various training practices we do, the practice matches we play, and various other activities we get our teams involved in? I'm joined today by Kevin Mulcahy, an expert in planning sessions and overall being guided by principles and how we can refine down our activities from those. Listen to the rest of this episode where we look at what the key principles are, how they can be developed through various activities, and when we touch on some key concepts around youth athletic development through sports for our underage players. Kev, this is going to be a bit different now. It's not quite as high level or as detailed as you might have been on Just Fly with Joel, coming back to the to the mere mortals like myself after your 2 or 3 appearances with Joel, is it?
Yeah, 2 with Joel. Yeah. It's really good because like Joel is and look, you think sometimes his popularity, and he's got a big following, and he was one of the first podcasts in S&C, really, and unbelievably ordinary, and I say that in a positive way, guy, just tremendous guy. But he's a very generalist, even though he comes from a track background and all that. He has a real broad look, and he's well able to dig into other spheres. And I've learned a lot from him because I like being a generalist, as much as possible. You have to be good enough at 1 or 2 things, but I like keeping a broad outlook on, athletic development, sports development in general.
Did you find it difficult trying to set the context for him around like the Gaelic sports at all? It's usually Americans, but even English or whatever that I talk to here and there, I do find myself over-explaining sometimes. They get it at the end of the day. It's like, you do have to explain the background of, like, say, the elite guys still playing with you 2 weeks later, they do get a bit thrown by that. But, like the English would know more about it than I think. Certainly the sporting English, let's say the coaching community, the people who are really into sport, they are watching. Like, they can ask questions that would surprise me, to be honest. Like, I was talking to Stu Armstrong recently. I actually met him in Dublin, and I'd been on that podcast as well. But Stu knows what he's asking, and he sees them as really, as he puts it, like really ecological games. Like, they're really dynamic. Like, I suppose the cultural background to hurling and football and where they came from, the Gaelic League or whatever historical attachments are there as well, it does seem quite, I suppose, unique and organic in that sense. Yeah, I was going to say, the culture or the cultural context of the sport is probably vastly different, where some of the athletic demands and even like the principles of the game are quite similar to the games that are already out there. Speaking of games, when we were just putting together a couple of notes for this, you said how you're finding your preparation for games now from the management or coaching side of things is similar to what you used to do as a player in terms of being ready for that game, and you're getting an awful lot more enjoyment from games now. What do you mean by that? Like, what's made it more enjoyable and what's led to that?
Over a period of years, I think I shifted. Maybe there might have been a bit of selfishness, ego, or just over analyzing the training, where the training was the main thing almost. And like, you were happy if you got the training right. And I think and you still need to do that, right? Very much move from a planned approach to a prepare, not plan approach, right? So prepare training sessions. I think there's just a catalogue of training sessions, games, practices, and experience that has come as well, right? And I'm comfortable if things go wrong in training far more than I would have been, say, 15 plus years ago, right? So that's part of it, right? So I'm comfortable with the time of getting things better, right? If I'm in a new team or it starts of the season or whatever, and we play a friendly, and you're not seeing something, I suppose 15 years ago I would have been going, am I doing the right thing? Are these lads good enough? Where the hell are we at? And whereas now I know there's no point in worrying about it for 6 weeks, that are 6 training sessions, or if I'm implementing a game, it could be next year,
that the concepts we're working on. And that happens all the time. I'm getting more and more curious about finding out actually from my own curiosity and rabbit hole kind of things that happen to me sometimes is like, why do player? I know I'm going off topic a bit, but I'll turn it around. You'll have to watch me on that, John. Um, coming back year two, right? And we were talking about just before we started and the spacing and stuff like that as well with learning. Coming back in year two, I'm always fascinated, and you don't know what's going to come. But in year two, these things happen that you spoke about last year, that you tried a training, that you created games for, that you even teamed whole practices for, right? And they just start happening, or they just start happening with a couple of guys. And that break and having a break, which I think in the micro sense of training and in the bigger overall year to year sense of training is absolutely critical, right? So that they have a break for whatever processes neurologically or motor learning is going on, that they are developing and improving with doing nothing, right? So I've got more relaxed with that, okay? And I also think you get more comfortable with approaches and concentrating on why you're there on match day is keep things sharp, keep things running pretty smoothly, watch what's happening. Can you make a little bit of a change? Because you can't do a whole pile, right? That's another thing. I probably relaxed about how much influence I can have. Make sure things don't dip before a match. That's probably I tend to do my motivating, right, over a whole season. And I believe it's like little conversations here and there, a meeting we might have at the start, like these are targets or setting expectations, and then little wins along the way, right? I don't think I think most of us have moved beyond the speech and the dressing thing. But what I do think you have to watch is like that there's a dip, or that the warm-up is going on too long, or there's a bit of negativity with a player, or a fella's feeling down or up, or he's late or whatever. Or some one of the 33-year-olds get pissed off because the 19-year-old is 10 minutes late. That kind of stuff. Like, so, and then when you're in the game, like, I've learned to simplify how I look at the game. Okay. To very simply, I can't do much about it now, but I can make a few changes, right? So this guy's in trouble here. Just change the cornerbacks. Let him get into the game then, and whatever. But other than that, you can't do a lot. But like, are they attacking us through the middle, around the sides, or over the top? And then in turn, where can we get at them? Are they in that low block football, low block that's popular or that's common now? Well, there's no point in trying to drive through the middle of them. So it's just those simple things, and getting messages to the leaders on the pitch going, let's go around. And I think just practice of that helps you relax. And then the freshness, being fit and ready to make decisions. I think I understand all that like if you're not 100%, well, maybe not 100%, but if you're not 95%, your decision-making process yourself is going to be a bit flawed. And, if you're a bit cranky, and sometimes you're just unavoidable. The baby was up at night, and like anybody else, right? Like the players themselves. And I think maturity, experience, developing empathy for the realities of the world, and that it's not your team, it's not your baby. It's like we're all in this together, and if it goes wrong or right, it's on all of us. And then also, it's not the end of the world, and you can develop things, and that things going wrong is generally just a chance to change things up or take a new approach. And so I think, and of course, I think education as well, to be honest, and I don't mean formal education per se, although obviously that's a part of it. I just think the education of talking to other coaches, getting comfortable with the sports I'm involved with, getting comfortable with what actually works. Because I would have gone the whole cycle, to be honest, where I got too tactical and probably overloaded players with information. Maybe not, and it was never too bad for match day, but in the weeks, or maybe. Whereas now, and I was talking to you earlier about cheat sheets and stuff. I did a cheat sheet on information the other day for my group, where times of the year, right? So there's times of the year to have chats, and maybe we can have more side of the pitch informational chats between games or after training, and then there's a time to jack it in and just let them play, because you've either developed in that 3, 6, 9 months or it hasn't. And that's fine, because the only thing you can do is actually hurt them. And it's like the warm up. It's like, the only thing you can do is get in the way.
And on match day, where do you like position yourself, or where do you try and balance being able to get messages across versus being able to observe the game, not being too caught up in the emotion of it, but still trying to have a sense of the flow and stuff? I find that really hard to balance.
It's a nightmare for me, because I'm totally torn between being up in a bank or in a stand and being on the sideline. And it comes down to trust in management, to be honest. 100%. I don't need to be on the sideline. So that'd be my preferred place. Would be, I was always jealous of the Aussie Rules guys, and I watched them and worked with them. Like the little hut, I'm talking about local junior clubs now, like they have a little hut, like an old scoreboard in GAA, where they would be up in to watch the game. And I used to do a bit of the running. So they'd send a message down to you and go out and tell Johnny he's not going hard enough. You know what I mean? And so I would prefer, because to be up higher, because you see the shape of the game. Are they dropping, like, is their centre back just sitting on the D and hurling? You know what I mean? Like, let's not drive the ball in on top of him then, and getting that message to somebody on the sideline. That would be my preferred way. And it gets me out of the way too, because as a person, whatever way I'm built, like unfairness, I struggle with. So referees at times, and if you're involved in football in Cork, Tipperary and Limerick, some of the refereing is questionable.
Man, I'm in Kilkenny. Some of them don't even bring whistles to matches, I'm convinced.
Oh, do you know what the funny thing about Limerick football is, right? Initially, I was horrified, right? But I've actually got used to it, and it's actually better. It's 1990s football, like, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way, right? It's physical, and the lads get on with it a lot more than you'd see in other places. Like, that is the truth, So it's just funny, and I've become almost. I maybe could be pulled on something from last weekend, but I'm almost 100% empathetic to referees in the new game.
Yeah, no, that's a hard job. Well, I want to circle back a little bit there, as you're saying you're getting a lot of enjoyment, but you're also comfortable in the 3, the 6, the 9 weeks of how it takes time to develop what it is you're trying to put in there. I think that links in with really the main thing we want to talk about is that sense of planning, both in terms of planning a session, but I think more importantly, the longer term. Here's where we want to go. It takes a while to get there. It's going to be messy, it's going to be dirty, it's going to be broken. There may be a backward step along the way. How do you start off, first of all, when you're planning something out, what do you start with? Like pen and paper, whiteboard, a few thought processes. Are you looking at your destination, working back? Is a little bit of a, here's where I'd like to go. I'm getting a better sense of where the players are at starting, and now I start in the middle nearly and work to where I'm meeting the players from, where I want to get to, or what's your general guide there?
I actually start with data. No, wouldn't have been always right. If I can, I get videos. Let's say if with a new team, and I can give you a little anecdote after as to why that's not always the full story either. But so I'd analyze, if in an ideal world, I'd get 3 championship matches from the last 2 years, right? Have a good look at them, free. Don't take any data. Just watch it, right? And then I might actually start, how do they move the ball? And I'll break it down into how they attack, blah, blah. So I've learned myself, either through mistake and watching others as well, that you can't change the world, right? You have to know what you're going into. And let's say from a chairman or a manager, maybe if I'm the coach or whatever, I need to know what they want and in what timeline. So there's certain parameters, like I would have done things last year with Ballylanders, knowing they were very honest at the start. We're 2, 3, 4 years here, where we were in 3 relegation finals in a row. Like, we want to get better, but we know we're not going to change it overnight. So you can, so my planning then, our higher level ideas in connection with the culture and what they're actually asking for is the first place to start. Then I look, so, or do I have a year and they were in the final last year and lost by a point? That's probably a different thing. Um,
And that helps with buy-in from everyone around and getting a bit of support if things do get a bit messy at the start, I assume.
yeah, it does. Yeah, like any organization, anything we do, whether it's a family, whether it's a business, a big corporate. I've worked in building sites, I've worked in gyms, I've worked in corporate America, and it's the same everywhere. If one or two guys are out, you're in trouble, right? Or if they're not in the loop or they haven't been talked to, right? Or if we don't all have some, 80-20 kind of rule, I'm getting 80% of what I want and we're on the same boat in some kind of fashion, right? And then I would go watch the videos, let's say, and keep it quite simple going, how are we going to attack? How are we going to defend? Right? Where are the obvious wins is another thing. For you, if you were new, and you come in at all sorts of levels too, like I've gone into teams where they don't know who the hell you are at all, right? And you have to work with them. They might need to see some fitness jumps immediately. They need to get a feel for this guy's not a bluffer, right? And that could be as simple as working on a kick out then or a puck out or something like that. Because I've identified a problem, right? They give away a heap of ball from here. So if I could help fix that problem a little bit, I'll work on that, right? So, and then I try to give myself time, if it's possible, at the start of the season to be completely open and observational, right? So I'll make training as enjoyable as I can, fitness and challenging, games and fun, so somewhere on that fun to challenging spectrum. So then they're going away and they're enjoying it, right? So you're going to get a certain amount of buy-in then. You won't get it all though, right? And then because then you're also meeting the characters, and you're seeing the little groups and you're seeing who's important and who's leading and who buys in completely, who doesn't, who's going to take a bit more work and all that kind of stuff. Because I might look at a player on a pitch, even at the highest levels of any sport, and go, geez, there's something really obvious there that anybody could think, but like he's a very difficult character, and but he's still a brilliant player. But so would you bother? Possibly not. You just try and facilitate that person in the team as best you can and play to their strengths. So whereas other guys, then you might get a bit of an early jump with. So I do keep it broad early and then try to find where are we really going to get wins and the most buy-in. And then there's things I do that nobody knows about.
And are you balancing that then, like, particularly longer term? Is there a little bit of thought towards like, okay, here's the main oppositions we'll be playing against. I think we've a good chance of overcoming these by this style, and marrying that with, well, here's the players I have at my disposal. They're all like fairly short and have good hands, and probably not going to play a long high ball approach. It's just a case of you have to marry the two of those somewhere, aim for the middle, but ultimately be guided in one or the other directions based on how it's going.
I would nearly be 90%. What have we got here? Like, what are our strengths? You have to start strength based. Now, I think over time, then you'll find out that there is other areas that might evolve that you didn't see at the start, where we do you know what, we might get a bit out of this, whether they're athletic or, I would have fitness tested them, and like, so see, and you can be fooled by everything, as you well know, John. Like, data is data, and it only gives us a number or picture or whatever. And so did a test with a team last week, and I guarantee they would out test the team that beat us by 9 points at the weekend, right? So, like, what is that? Is it physical, tactical? Is it whatever? So, but I would test them and see where they're at in various things. But I think one major part I left out there. I would have sent out a Google form to them to privately tell me where they're at with physical, how they felt kickouts went last year. Is there anything they'd like to do attacking wise? And I would have some information that would also, and I would say 8 times out of 10 or 80% of it would tally with what I saw anyway, right? And you're then trying to marry, right? And they could have been very vocal on this. Like there would have been players meet me at the start or a captain or something and going, like, we're just not fit enough, Kevin. Like that's the big thing. And or our kickouts are like they're disaster and we need some help with that. Or so and then it's you're pushing an open door in a lot of ways for that. But and then you'll find things that were underneath that though that are actually the problem. You know what I mean? So say fitness, like, well, three of the older lads don't like starting until 6 weeks into the season or whatever, and you're going, well, that's a problem, so you don't know what's there underneath it all, but you are just looking for that 80-90% buy-in from the general and a group and deal with the individuals in a little bit as you go.
I think that Google form with players at the start is so important, just to get a sense of what their thinking is. And you don't even have to be like completely explicit in saying, yeah, we're doing exactly what you all said and that. But as you allude to it in little bits as you're going along, you'll start seeing some of the cuter players like, oh, he listened to what I said and he's acting on it. And sometimes that quieter sense of buy-in can actually be far more rewarding and not fulfilling as word, but actually create greater confidence in you as the season goes on, as opposed to those quick little wins at the start. When it comes then to defining game principles, you were saying this is something now you're really trying to help coaches with through your courses and through your community and all. How do you help? That's your principle or your main principles, and they're clear in your head coming across. If you're starting working with a coach to help them in their planning process, how do you go about guiding them out, or what maybe questions or information do you look for at the start to then start putting a few steps in place?
Well, let's say explain strategy and tactics to me. Or what is your understanding of principles of play at the moment, right? So there's a lot of information out in the world now, right? And even how I interpret, say, there's a lot of stuff in soccer, right? And I like listening to some of the tactical fellas. Some of them are really good. And, it just helps me challenge my ideas and am I on the right track with certain things, right? So, but what somebody's understanding of what principles of play are can be wildly different, right? So, and then I have some templates actually around the hierarchy of principles, right? Starting with the principles of human movement. There is a reason sports are played in certain size pitches. There's a reason, like we can only run for so long. There's a reason there's a length of games of 60, 70, 80, 90 minutes, right? So I start with that and go like, they're the, like, for many reasons. Okay, my 5'9" is number one, right? I grew up in Ireland, number two, right? And you know what I mean? And then you can have conversations about that like, so there's principles of movement and certain genetic parameters that we're all in a mix up, let's say. And then there's principles and rules of the game, right? So there's rules of the game which kind of set out a certain level of parameters that we have to work within. Okay. And then there's a level below that where there's principles of the game. And I would ask them then, what do you remember your early coaches saying to you? Is there anything like that your dad or your coach said to you all the time, right? And, it might be something like, get between your man and the ball when you don't have it, right? So that's a principle of play. It's a principle of defending, right? So, and if they come up with something like that, or I give them something like, the sideline is your friend, or the 2v1 rule, or anything like that, or anything they come up with and I can attach that, right? That's a principle. Okay. So give and go is a principle. Pass and move are principles. They're universal principles, probably very much on the higher level. And then they'll go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So all that stuff is stuff we can work on all the time, and probably stuff we should be dealing with 13, 14, 15-year-olds in helping them understand the game at a very, very broad level, And I talk then to coaches probably at the next level would be like just principles of attack and defend, right? How are we going to break down the defense? How are we going to get the ball back? And there's many, many different ways to do it. and if you want to create principles of the game for your team, like start unbelievably high level. And when I say high level, I mean broad, abstract, like space. Okay? Create space, close it. Like Italian soccer got knocked 30 or 40 years of dominance out of it it's not that the processes and the play was simple, right? But the concepts and ideas were simple. They had AC Milan as the team I use a lot, and I grew up with that. That's my nostalgic attachment, let's say. But Saki and all those, like, it was incredibly simple stuff in concept. Now, they had brilliant players, right? And we do have to be conscious of that sometimes as well, right? But I talk an awful lot, both the players and coaches I work with, about small game, big game. The small game, I'll use Gaelic football now and it's an interesting contrast to hurling, because the same thing exists for me, but they are much more different, because you have to be attached to you have to be attached to the small and big game a bit more in hurling than you do in football, right? And I'll explain why. So the small game for me is within a hand pass or a kick pass. Okay? And I use principle stroke questions to start with coaches and players at the start, always. Well, in the last few years, as I said, when I moved away from overcomplicating stuff a bit, right? Am I close enough? Say we don't have the ball, out of possession, right? Am I close enough to make a tackle? If the answer is no, get between the ball and the goal. All right? Now, that's changed a little bit with Gaelic football now, because 3 lads can't do that. But that's fine. Or they might not be able to do that, right? So understanding your role, you're a striker, you're a top 3, full forward line, whatever you want to call it. Right? Other than that, though, everybody else can have the same principles. So, like, if you get a group of guys, particularly if you start this stuff with 14-year-olds, right? And they understand, I'm close enough. So, and my close enough, John, and your close enough might be different. If you're faster than me, you may have the ability to close down a little bit faster, have that confidence and that speed. Whereas I might just go, oh, that's 50-50. I'll get the ball hopped over my head, so I'm going to drop, right? And that's down to everybody, but it's a shared set of principles, And over time, like, simple ideas like that, and then in turn, the big game is the game ahead, right? So if I'm 2 or 3 kick passes more away from the play, right? Well, then I need to think about where my positioning, right? Where am I? Okay. And whether it's coaches who are new to this or players, I think the learning is similar enough, right? And honestly, like, I'm seeing more and more players pick it up as they go, right? And it takes so long, because I don't know, is it the part of the world I'm in, or what is, right? And this would be a relatively shared view from a lot of people that I mix with, right? That this stuff has not been worked on, or hasn't, at least in the last 20 years, at underage. And they're coming, and we're starting very new and with this stuff. And the older they are, right, the slower that process is. Even though that sounds really simple now, right?
I think that's a fair point. Like, look at, say, we're of the age now of finished playing, filtering back into coaching. And most of our playing time was drill based. It was being given direction, carry these directions out. And so many people are influenced by the way they were coached initially, and most broaden their horizons and look around, look for influence and like that. So I think it's peak time now for people filtering back into that, and most people filter back in at underage. I think that's why it's happened. I think there is a big evolution of that. I would see it seems to come more from football than hurling. Hurling's not that slower, but just like as you said, the difference between the small game and the big game is different between hurling and football. Like the 50-50 contests are still a lot more important than hurling. It's actually rare to see straight one-off 50-50 contests in football. I think that's what, but it is evolving now through more decision-making stuff, more game-based stuff that guides players in their decision-making, what they should do, as opposed to win the ball, clear to put it over the bar. It's gone away from that narrow view. And I think as more younger players come through to the adult level of that, we're going to see far more adaptability to different situations.
Yeah, I think most sports go through a certain cycle, right? And Aussie rules seems to be 5, 10, 15 years ahead of GAA in some, I don't know what the exact time is, right? But I would have seen them go through organization as the first phase. So, like, you see the big clubs around Ireland, they have got organized, right? And that brings a certain amount of success. Okay. They're just if that's looking after kids, keeping people playing, or just being organized so that you don't lose so many, right? The next phase seems to be physical. So S&C came, right? And emerged, and that's another kick. Okay. So you get fitter than other people. Okay. And I actually went through that phase. I've gone through this phase completely, actually. Right. And then tactical is the next one. Right. So that's the cycle I think all sports go through to some degree. And then there's a cycle, like you've really explained on the head there, like it's always about the next group coming through, going back to coaching, who are, let's say, in a progressive manner. I don't want to undermine anybody who coached me or anybody else, but like they are 20, 30% more progressive than their older brother or their dad or whatever, right? And then that goes through another cycle. Now, it probably is moving faster these days because of resources, sharing material, social media, etc., etc. And it has accelerated a lot of stuff to, where I look at someone like Armagh and I'm flabbergasted how tactically brilliant they are. They've really moved on.
A couple of bits to jump in on there. I think the social media has accelerated a bit, but I do wonder, is there the level of understanding there? I think people see stuff. I'm not sure they have the dots. There's a lot of dots, but I don't know, are they all connected? To jump back a few years, you said there about, first of all, it's the organisation and then fitness on top of that and then the tactical evolution. Like, there was a really good example of that in football where Armagh and Tyrone got really good at like tackling defensive structures and they put in a lot of fitness. And then you saw Mayo and Kerry dominated the back end of that decade by taking the defensive structure and really good fitness and putting that on top of really good, skillful footballers. Not that Tyrone and Armagh weren't, but there just was more of a core skill group there. And then Dublin evolved all of it together for a period of time. So that's a nice way of looking at that. I hadn't put it together in that step.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And like and I think people need to look at things sometimes, in how much stability does this need? So, a lot of things can be very organic and emerge. Like Kerry football would be a great, like we talk about principles of play there now, right? And I create charts and help people formally talk about principles of play. But I could go to a pitch in the West of Kerry, and I'm not joking about this now, right? And I mean this in a very positive sense. And I'll meet an old lad on the side of the field, and he'll explain Gaelic football to me in his way, right? Watching the kids play to a level that most of the rest of the country doesn't understand, right? Like, because I went to school with Kerry lads, I was coached all the way up by a Kerry man. I'm on that side of Cork City where a lot of the West Cork Kerry people moved to the Ballincollig general area, right? So massive change in influence. All the clubs became more football, not football focused, but like football became a much bigger thing over 30 years. And it's amazing how these things take so long, but they do happen, right?
Sure, how long did it take Coola to get good at hurling from the lads from the countryside? Not, and like there's so many good Dublin people up there, I don't mean to be disparaging to them, but it was an influx of country people that years later led to Coola having the big explosion in hurling they had in the late teens.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And they were passionate people who, I don't know, for many reasons wanted attachment to what they did themselves when they grew up, or they really enjoy. I think this is probably the base level, right? They really enjoyed it. And I think this is where people like me and you come from as well. And they want other people, right? And it's not 100% altruistic, right? I don't believe that either, because I get an unbelievable amount out of coaching. Socializing, health, like off the Richter scale. You know what I mean? And I miss it. COVID was such an eye opener in that sense, right? So, but we still at the same time go, I want my kids or the kids around the place to have some of the opportunities that we had and to enjoy the games and play them for a long time and all that stuff, right? So, yeah, and like just going back to the Kerry thing, like the different parts of the game that they talk about within their culture, I believe, right? I'd never lived in Kerry, but like I know enough of them, you know, what are the important runs to make? You run from out to in, right? And you watch how many players from dual counties in particular, I've noticed. I've no data to back this up, right? But I've grown up in them, and I suppose I'm around football long enough now. There is particular habits with dual players, right? They love a solo of the ball. Absolutely love a solo of the ball. Whereas a Kerry fellow will just drive it in, right? And there's and again, I'm not being disparaging, right? But they make different runs. They follow their runs. So they've all these little things that they talk about, possibly quite casually, not and I bet you it's not too dissimilar to Kilkenny hurling, right? And I remember when I was younger, maybe late teens, early 20s, when Cork and Kilkenny were highly competitive, right? And Cody, etc., used to talk about we've no tactics, right? And I used to be thinking he's full of it, right? But now I get it. Now I'm sure they had tactics, right?
They're ingrained principles of play.
Yeah, ingrained principles of play that the culture deliver, right? And like Kerry and Kilkenny are great examples, right? And you could talk about the right size counties and populations and all that, which I think they probably are as well, right? As well as the culture and all that. But then the best players come through. So they're 6'3" guys who have a bit of athleticism, but they understand the game. So actually, what happens usually, exceptional guys like Richie Hogan, DJ come through, right? That's fair enough. Who are not maybe of massive stature, but actually most of them, and this is the same in Kerry, are the best athletes. But what has happened is that the culture has taught them the game, right? Over a long period of time. Okay. And you have to be very careful about keeping it or losing that, so they're also principles of play, but they're not formally written out in any book anywhere, right? Or and so sometimes I'll use anecdotes like that with players and coaches as well, if there, if a conversation is taken that way, and it's funny because some of the most, let's say, aggressive response to stuff I put out there would come from Cork, Tipperary, Kilkenny, and Kerry.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. Now, just to circle back a little bit here to our planning, I am a very structured and systemized person. When I'm looking at a season, it probably comes from 13 years of teaching now. I want to lay out my curriculum for myself. I'll have my key guiding principles. So it's I'm designing the module. Learning outcomes, assessment, work backwards from that. I fill in the lectures, the tutorials, the practicals week by week. I'll have like a key principle, a key heading, a key team on each of those. And when it comes to the day-to-day session planning, once I've spent like a week identifying those, each individual one is so easy. I use that for coaching a team 1 year, spend ages thinking out defence, attack, what we do with the ball, what we do out shapes, all like that. Spread that out into mini sections over sessions. The design session becomes so easy from that. Are you looking at something similar because you seem a bit more of an abstract thinker? Are you then able to educate that across to someone you're working with, or did you have to put a system on your style of thinking to help with that?
One thing I've learned that I have had to do is to explain to players how I operate, actually. So in line with what you're doing there, I have guiding principles as well, right? I tend to keep like loads of practices, like principles over methods, let's say, right? I've loads of methods, right? And I also bit believer is the wrong word, but like, you know, I have a strong belief, let's say, in variability. Okay. So I will look at, I won't be unbelievably specific in the training sessions. And I'll often change my mind walking into the field or based on numbers or something like that. But this is an attacking team session, and I'm going to look for a bit of extra kicking here, right? So I know of a few practices that are a constraint like time that are going to put pressure on players to kick the ball more. Or this year, we have a great example for you because the kickouts and the breaking ball has become an exaggerated part of Gaelic football, right? I've created practices now where there's loads of kicking, okay? And I'll interweave them with maybe some running or some smaller games where, you know, because kicking games tend to be big and open and, you know, wilder, let's say. So, but I'll go into that and I'll have 3 or 4 kind of ideas and start with the game and see how it's going, right? And I think more about principles and constraints, right? How am I going to change this now if they get it too fast? Like sometimes they're too good at it too fast. That's one of the big, well, not challenge. Yeah, it is a challenge. Like you think they're going to be challenged by this and they just drive through it, right? And then other times there'll be a practice and you can be surprised either way. There'll be a practice that you're doing and you think it should be fairly easy to get. And they really struggle with it. But that's fine, right? So that's part of the process. So I more tend to now I do write out every session actually, right? But I theme them. I'll have an idea of what is important to the team, right? But what is important to the sport first, right? So if you know, it is a bit challenging at the moment in the sense that I'm getting my head around new rules and you know, some teams are picking it up really fast and others and individuals then in between that, right? But I suppose you're looking for the process. I mean, I play the game every training session, right? We have an idea of a skill, right? So, for instance, with Newstown, I went really heavy on weak-sided play, right? So it was almost always a part of the training session. I did talk to them about it, but not that much. More of it was just the encouragement and say, lads, the handbrake's off here, especially early practices and training sessions. I might, you know, have these small-sided games or wave practices where sometimes I actually forced left-sided play, right? And I'll tell you why I did that. That's a heavy constraint that I wouldn't be a fan of normally, actually, right? To tell someone they have to finish the score with their weak side, with their left side. But what I found was, one, they had to do it, okay? So, but also, weirdly, and I didn't plan this at the start, but it's what emerged, they got really good at getting the left-siders on the ball. So I didn't change the left-footers from playing normally, okay? So, and then after a while, I took away that constraint and I was just then encouraging or maybe creating games that would force players left and all this kind of stuff, right? So that was a skill that I was trying to put into at least 2 out of 3 training sessions, you know, and I was monitoring that in the background. I had videos of them. As I said, I would get videos and then I tracked that and I basically did kind of case studies in that. But then in an attacking day, I know that if we're attacking, I'm going to try and constrain the defenders, right? But we might actually use the same game, or I could use the same game. I probably wouldn't use the same game 2 nights in a row, but if I use, say, a time-based game, and they're after getting used to the time constraint, let's say, you know, 20 seconds from kick out receiving to taking a shot, for argument's sake, right? And we're focused on attacking, but obviously there's opposition. So the other lads are gonna, when you don't have the ball, you're defending, right? So I might constrain them a bit more, right? With sometimes deliberate instruction. Get 12 players inside in the D, right? At the start of every play, or what I do is over the top practices. They kick it out over the top of the attackers, and they're playing, and I just say, you go in and sit there, right? And if they come into it, you tackle them and try and take it off them. And I'll have a target for them to get out, right? So they can score as well, because that's an important part, right, of motivation and stuff. And then I'm watching how we attack them, right? So I'm watching my players attack, right? And if I wanted to go man to man, right? And when you get comfortable with this, then you can actually go in and stand by the goal and call over the captain and go, next one, no, go man to man. And then ultimately you want to step away completely, right? And that's this exact same practice, right? And I do this all the time. I do this over the top practice. And I constrain the defenders and I see what the attackers do. And then are you having a conversation? Do I need to put a constraint with the attackers and say, lads, we need to get 2 fellas deep. We've no depth whatsoever when you attack. So you've no chance of breaking down that defense without, you know what I mean? Whatever so I might need to instruct them. So, but what I do is hopefully see what happens, right? So, and then on the exact opposite, right, I will put a constraint on the attackers. And again, I usually pick 3 things. So I might say overload, right, overload deep, or a flash run to the D. They'd be 3 popular football kind of, tactical approaches, right? One, I'm helping the lads understand what that is, right? But what I'm actually doing tonight is looking at the defenders. Do we all get drawn over because there's an overload? Which is what an overload would want, right? Whereas, are we keeping our shape and staying compact, which is what most what we want defensively usually. Okay, so that's how I organize, right? So I do team sessions, and then sometimes I'll team even more specific things, like a kick out or a kick into the goalie's hands. How do we defend that, or whatever, So you can team sessions then, but I start quite broad and attack, defend, kick out, attack, defend, kick out, and a cycle like that.
But you are going in with like a guiding principle, and I'd be the same. Like, we're going in tonight, it's attack focused, and we want to look at attacking with wit. There are hundreds of different games or activities we could use for that, but my observation is guided by, are we attacking with wit, or what would help us create wit? The feedback I'm given, the instruction I'm given, as you said there, about any constraints you're putting in, are to guide wit. But I think most importantly is, I'm communicating that to the players from early doors. So when we come in and I'm like, think about this yourselves, or even defenders there, what are you coping with? Do you find it more difficult to cope as defenders with the wit they're creating? And some of the good backs would be like, there is no wit here whatsoever. I can stand 15 yards in, I can still mark the man each time. And that's a really good eye-opener then for the wing forwards, like, oh, so I should run that way instead of straight forward. That's exactly what you should do. And there's way more learning from something like that than me saying, run wide, run right, run wide. But it's still guided by the key principle I had going in there, communicating that, and brief examples to the players of what this should look like and why it feeds into the outcome we want of, i.e. a score.
Yeah. And sometimes I got more into this now. I'll use a clip maybe that day from Armagh or Dublin or whoever it might be doing something good. Like, Armagh and Donegal have got very good at depth in attack, right? So, I'll throw a little clip, what I mean. And I've got much more deliberate about this now. I'll give them an outline of the training session all the time as well.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. The last bit we want to move on to then is looking at, like, as we're talking there about like key principle and all, but something I know you do a lot of and you're quite experienced in is merging the physical with the technical, tactical stuff as well. I know you're doing a good bit of it with some underage teams as well. Do you want to just talk a little bit about the current role you're in there, how you're doing it? But you mentioned about the confidence it has brought to the people you are bringing along with you in terms of how they can do similar.
Yeah, so I've had a heap of experience now in the last 3 or 4 months, in particular with the youth development and doing blocks of athletic development with teams in Douglas and actually Glenrue Hurling and Ballylanders girls as well, LGFA, and Camogie, sorry. And I suppose one of the things I do though, and with coaches and with teams, is to try and demystify a lot of the language. And like, strength and conditioning is intimidating to some people. Like, the term is, you know what I mean? And I get why, right? Like, even in when I was working with general population people, there'd be women come to the door for their first session and they wouldn't come in the door, because like, are you going to kill me? Right. So that's literally what they would say to you.
That does show some of the poor practices that happened in the past, though.
Yeah. 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 So anyway, like let's say in both cases, very similar, working with the coaches while I deliver the program, and I set up most of them are big numbers, right? Douglas, literally we were doing 3 nights a week where they were coming in from 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock, 12 hours a week. And it was actually more than 12 teams because some of them were 45 minutes and stuff like that, right? So an unbelievable experience for me too, actually, to have it such blocked. And it's so interesting to watch 14-year-old girls followed by 14-year-old boys, followed by 15-year-old boys, followed by 15-year-old girls, and just all the differences that go on, right? But you could sense with some of the parents and some of the questions I was getting, I did an introductory night, right? Was fear, right? And the other thing then from maybe the more experienced coaches was like, how are we going to keep this going? Or how are we going to do this, right? And that's what I was listening to, and I was answering their questions the best I could. So we got into their very big numbers. So we would split them into 3 groups and cycle them through an astro and a hall, a basketball kind of hall, 5-a-side soccer hall, and the gym. And they would give me 2 to 3 to 4 coaches, stroke parents, volunteers, people helping out to come to the gym and just keep it organized, help me understand the kids and the different people that were coming in and all that kind of stuff. And after a while, I noticed it before Christmas, but really the second cycle, the parents stroke coaches were helping cue the kids in deadlifting, in chin-ups, in bent, and it was my cues, right? And I am, just by my coaching approach and I suppose the stuff I believe in, I don't overcoach early, right? There is a safety element. So like you're hovering in that weird zone sometimes, and there was other types of safety issues because there was 18, 13-year-old boys in a relatively small space, right? So there's that kind of stuff. And I got a massive amount of satisfaction. Now there was huge development in how some of them moved, and it's particularly, let's say, the weaker and middling group. They were the ones who went the most, right? That's not a surprise to me, but I still love seeing it, right? And the coaches though, and like I would deliver to them like push, pull, squat, hinge, right? And then we might develop landing, throwing, a few other things to put on. But like if we get them, so when you go to training now, and we're nearly getting there, and I'm going to go out in the field and help them with speed stuff and other things like that now as the natural weather and year evolves, right? But go into the gym for 12 minutes after training and do push, pull, squat, hinge. And I have a list up as I speak in the Douglas gym where we have push, pull, squat, hinge, and a heap of variations of those movements, right? The actual methods, the exercises, the Bulgarians, the whatever the hell you want, right? So that's a set of principles. Like push, pull, squat, hinge really is a set of principles. They're movement principles, which I was talking about earlier, right? That's the way we move broadly, right? And they get that. And then some of them are even able to see, sure, that's what I do at the gym. And then you're really making progress. And then you're like, for me and Douglas and Ballylanders as well, and all the groups really is like, right, that's the person who doesn't come from a hurling background, right? Is a bit nervous about coaching skills and the game maybe. But they go to the gym, they understand this stuff. Maybe they can help with the athletic development side when Kevin's not here. And now we're going to create a group of, I already have a group of athletic development people, right? So that would have started off as all the managers, right? And some of them are still in that. But now it's becoming other volunteers, right? And I can then create templates and cheat sheets like I was talking to you earlier about that I do with the community, and help those coaches to demystify what it is. And then bring them into the gym once a week after one of the training sessions and do the push, pull, squat, hinge. And the biggest thing I've noticed in the last few years that after training gym does is replace the dressing room. because most of them don't use dressing rooms anyway. And it's socially magic because it's just that little bit more relaxed. It's, and it's not the pitch, and, and all ages. The senior hurlers last year was the same, and there is just that little lowering of expectation of, challenge of hurling training or whatever it might be. And they relax a bit and they chat because it's a place that you can talk because you're going to take a break between doing a deadlift or whatever, So I'm trying to, and we're in the middle of it. Like, so it's not perfect. It's going to be an ongoing project that we roll that out. And it was one of my guiding aims is, right, I got to keep this reasonably simple. I got to keep it reasonably fun and challenging all at the same time, right? But I got to get across to the coaches that this is not rocket science. And I think we've got somewhere with that. Because I saw it. Like, I saw it. They're just doing it. And that was, well, outside of the kids and their development, I think that was the most satisfying part of that cycle.
Yeah, it's stuff I've done an awful lot, like in my early days coaches, doing that resistance stuff for adolescents and obviously through schools. Like, the key principles you mentioned there, even when, like, I'd have had classes of 30 in school at a time and you want to teach them the resistance stuff, I end up doing it through circuits. And I might have like 4 stations that are important. And they're your squat, hinge, push, pull. Everything else is literally just filler, so that they're somewhat fresh and somewhat engaged, so that when they get to those 4, they do them right. They're the 4 I'm bouncing around between to cue and to instruct and make sure they're doing those right. And the others are literally just keep them busy, because I don't have enough equipment to have everyone doing all of them at the same time. And they're somewhat entertained doing it as well. I was chatting to one of the other lecturers and work there, and he's like coaching underage in one of the most successful clubs in Ireland. And it's kind of been suggested they need an S&C with every underage team. And I'm like, man, I will make you these templates. This, like, you're a really good coach. You're able to go in and do your soccer, do your hurling, do your football. You can do these movements yourself. I'm really confident that you can do it. You just need a little bit of a framework around. And that's the starting point. Squat, hinge, push, pull. 3 or 4 variations of each. 10 minutes after training. Replace the completely pointless cool downs that people do. Drop that in instead. A little bit of a communal aspect to it as well. And you're done.
Absolutely. And I think just, getting someone like me or you in and helping a club and being open and a developmental long-term idea, everybody gets a little bit more comfortable as well. We're not trying to whack this in or coach educate these people in a formal way. We're trying to give the information, knowledge, and experience we have you have to be safe, you have to deliver, you have to deliver, right? They have to get fitter and stronger, obviously. But that you're there to help them drive on. And like, it is demystifying and it is making them relax a bit. And I got a great kick out of last week with Ballylanders with the girls. I was watching, so we sectionized it into warm up, right? First of all, everybody together. And then there was a strength section with me. They were doing sprinting, repeat sprints and chases and sled sprints and all sorts, right? And then games. And that was Olympic handball to dodgeball to tag rugby, blah, blah, right? So
is that floor or is it station based?
Yeah. So actually we had an Astro, right? Yeah. So it was 3 sections.
Yeah. And they rotate around like.
Yeah, exactly, right? And it worked well, right? But I saw stuff, the lay coaches, let's say, right? The guys who brought me there, doing in the sprints that I hadn't seen before and that I stole immediately and did a training 2 nights later, right? They were out there doing whatever homework they were doing, and I could see they had changed from week 1 or 2 and evolved it, right? And that's just coaches being interested. Their kids are obviously involved as well, but these guys are ex-players and very interested and want to be better coaches and wanted to deliver for the kids as well. But I just found it really interesting. It was a circular game, chase, but curve running. And now I looked at it as curve running, right? But like they were curve running with a chasing fun game. And I was like, I've never seen that before. So it just goes to show you, like, there's a lot of information out there. And if you give people a framework and tell them, I think sprinting is hugely important, right? And particularly to younger, and the more, and like, you'd want to see the difference in some of the girls after 6 weeks, like, just blew me away. And it wasn't to do with me. It was just like, We gave them the opportunity. It was hard to get out of, right? Because it's not the game. You can't stay in cornerback and avoid the ball as much. You know what I mean? And hopefully it might keep some of them playing longer. But it was just that the coaches took on that job, right, and ran with it to a very successful level from my observation, right? And that means anybody can do that.
Having been provided with a few guiding principles beforehand, which I think is the key there. Speaking of guiding principles, you help people a lot with session design. You offer a platform for that. You can do your quick sell on this here now.
Circle community group on the Circle app. I've created it really to help new and curious coaches to develop their coaching, to become better practice designers, and help build them better environments in team sport. That is better for the players ultimately. What I do is basically create content that will help support them on their journey, and it's suited to all team sports really, although I'd probably use hurling, football, soccer largely as references, to help them develop physical, technical, tactical areas of their coaching game. And there's dedicated discussion spaces, exclusive content and resources. I create templates, cheat sheets, videos on various things. I do weekly videos on the sporting weekend, just to give my take from largely towards a coaching side of things, whether it's big sport or some of my own experiences or other people's experiences that tell me about. I have mini courses on representative learning design, on constraints-led approach. I'm going to be doing some Q&As, live Q&As coming up in the next week or two. And people are starting to ask me now questions, and I'm designing little videos answering those questions around practice design or whatever they're going to ask. So people can avail of a free trial on the which John is attaching to the bottom of the podcast notes, and you can have a look in there and go from there. Okay, you'll have access to everything for the trial, and you can check out the videos and see if it works for you. The other thing I want to talk about briefly is something that is exciting for me and is a big project that the Ballahura development group have created in the North Cork, South Limerick area, and that is to get older men out exercising, right? So strengthen and socialize project, we're calling it for now, and we're targeting basically men in rural areas. Okay, I'm starting next Wednesday on the April the 9th at 10 a.m. in Charleville GAA Club. We will be starting these group classes. Okay, so what we're appealing to here, because we know we won't reach a lot of these people in social media, is a husband, your husband, your brother, sibling, if you're listening to this, your dad, right, or your uncle, particularly if they're isolated, you feel they're not getting enough, socialization or exercise or whatever, everything else in between. It's open to absolutely everybody. Obviously, the first project is starting in Charleville. We hope it goes well and it expands to other parts of Ballahura, which covers a massive area. So we're going to start with Charleville and get people there in. So if you know people in Charleville, please share this with them. Aoife Power is the contact in Ballahura Development, and I will leave contact details for Aoife and the Google Sheet for sign up as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your time today, Kevin. I'll link all that below, and I'm sure we'll have you back on again at some stage.
Yeah, I'd love to, John. That was great.